They also talk about how race is merely cosmetic. Aren't you insulting all the intelligent people here and the 80% of African Americans who are Democrats by claiming that the current Democratic Party has anything to do with that Dixiecrat party from 50 years ago that was trying to stop them from voting? Aren't you conflating the word Democrat with progressive? They have utterly nothing to do with each other. The current Democratic Party has absolutely none of those values from 50 years ago, and you're pretending that they are guilty of something. Aren't you trying to claim that Jesse Jackson is a dupe and shouldn't be supporting the Democratic Party because Abraham Lincoln was a Republican and freed the slaves?
Let me try to tackle that very frontally. First of all, probably the biggest thing going for the big switch that I mentioned earlier are two facts, both of which are very powerful. The first is that whites in the South, who used to be Democrats, do now predominantly vote Republican.
Yep.
Right? Fact number two is that blacks who used to vote Republican now vote overwhelmingly Democratic. Yep. And operating on the assumption, which I think is reasonable, that people understand where their own interests lie, it would certainly be right that blacks currently see their identification and their interest in the Democratic Party. Now, here are two interesting questions to ask. Number one, when did blacks switch from being Republicans to being Democrats? The Democratic Party was the party of the Dixiecrats all the way through the 60s. And if what you say is true, that the blacks made a switch to their racial friends, it would appear that the black switch would have to come in the 70s and 80s, when blacks see these racists are now moving over there, so it makes sense for us to move over here. But in reality, blacks moved overwhelmingly to the Democratic Party in the 1930s. The black vote went from about 15% Democratic to about 70% Democratic within 4 years.
The places they could vote.
That's right, but
which was the North.
Also in the
Jackie Robinson was a Republican for darn good reason.
That's absolutely right. But here's what I'm getting at.
You wouldn't be today.
We can debate Jackie Robinson because it's always difficult to know what dead people would say. If Martin Luther King were alive today, Martin Luther King isn't alive today. Okay, but here's the point I'm getting at. The reason that blacks switched from the Republican Party to the Democratic Party had everything to do with the benefits of the New Deal and nothing to do with racism. In fact, yes, and in the South, too, blacks switched to the Democratic Party. It's not that blacks couldn't vote in the South. It's that there were all kinds of barriers to black voting. Under FDR, blacks couldn't vote in the South at all. No blacks voted in the South.
Very, very few.
How many? How many?
I don't know.
Okay. I thought so. Look, there were all kinds of poll taxes and barriers imposed by the Democrats on the black vote until the Democrats realized that they could get the black vote by offering jobs, welfare, retirement programs. Are you telling me that FDR in the South was telling blacks who were voting for the Democrats, you can't vote? Not true. Not true. Blacks in the North and the South switched to the Democratic Party because of New Deal benefits. Many of them were very sad about doing it because they were leaving the party of emancipation and Lincoln and flinging themselves into the party of the Ku Klux Klan and the Dixiecrats who were in the South and were in the Democratic Party. Exactly. So what I'm saying is it was a Faustian bargain in which you get economic benefits and at the same time you're in bed with the racists and you're on your own team. And I'm saying that's American history. Now, whites began to switch to the Republican Party, but much later. Whites began to switch to the Republican Party in droves in the 70s and 80s. Now, here's the point. If you look at racial opinion in the South, and there's a voluminous body of data on this, as racism in the South dramatically declines, the Southern identification with the Republican Party begins to increase. There's an opposite track. Racism is declining in the South, and whites begin to move to the Republican Party. In fact, two scholars who've written a book about this trace that the least racist Southerners all became Republicans. That the racist, the poor white racist Democrat never became a Republican. He was a dug-in Democrat to the end of his days. So the Democratic Party remained the party of racism. And as the South became less agrarian, more prosperous, industry came to the South, the post-industrial society, the Republican appeal of equal opportunity, free markets, prosperity, appealed to Southerners. And that's why they... So what I'm getting at is that the progressives have sold the South on a guilt trip. Even this whole thing about, the Civil War was really about slavery and the South did slavery. Wait a minute. Again, the Northern Democrats protected slavery. The Civil War, the fight over slavery was between the Democratic Party, North and South, that protected it, and the Republican Party, which only was in the North, that opposed it. That's what that fight was about. It wasn't just... The North-South thing is now a disguise to hide the responsibility of a major political party that was the party of slavery for 100 years. True or false?
Welcome back to this special edition of Hannity. Scandals plaguing the Democrats for months. This program has been shining a light on one particularly damning scandal involving the Clintons and the very sketchy sale of Uranium One. Last night, The Hill's John Solomon released a brand new report detailing that. Now, even Democratic Senator Dianne Feinstein is seeking access to an informant who helped the FBI investigate a bribery case surrounding that Russian state energy company. But Hillary Clinton wants you to think this scandal is much to do about nothing. Take a look at this.
The Uranium One story has been debunked countless times by members of the press, by independent experts. It is nothing but a false charge that the Trump administration is trying to drum up. This is such an abuse of power, and it goes right at the rule of law. If they send a signal that we're going to be like some dictatorship, some authoritarian regime where political opponents are going to be unfairly, fraudulently investigated, that rips at the fabric of the contract we have, that we can trust our justice system.
In a radio interview early today, Hillary Clinton reiterated those comments and even called the Uranium One scandal a, quote, political stunt. Joining us now with reaction is the author of Clinton Cash from the Government Accountability Institute, Peter Schweitzer. Good evening, Peter.
Hey, Judge, great to see you.
Good to see you as well. When your book first came out in 2015, did you ever wonder why in 2015 there wasn't an automatic investigation, by Congress, by the FBI, by the Justice Department? And because Peter, when I read that book, we covered it here. I covered it on Justice. I mean, it was explosive. Your facts were uncontroverted. And yet Hillary Clinton says, it was a false charge. It was controverted by, press reports. I mean, what is she talking about?
Yeah, it's certainly not the way that I recall it. Look, the book came out in April of 2015. The Uranium One story we shared before the book came public with the investigative unit at the New York Times. They ran a 4,000-word front-page piece confirming the findings, the hidden donations, the CFIUS approval, the Clintons' connections to this drama. And really, after the book came out, Judge, the FBI did launch an investigation. Right. And they felt there was enough compelling evidence. This has been widely reported in the Wall Street Journal and other places. They felt there was enough evidence to get the Department of Justice to grant them subpoena powers. And they were turned down by the Obama Justice Department. So, her argument that this has been debunked, it hasn't been debunked. All the debunkers do, Judge, is they change the timeline or they exclude facts and they say the fact pattern doesn't work because they've excluded certain facts. And what I've said from the beginning, you and I have talked about it, yeah. You're a seasoned prosecutor, is, look, You just need to investigate and find out what happened, and then you can figure out what crimes, if any, have been committed. And that's all we're calling for.
You know, Peter, I have to commend you, because but for you, we wouldn't know about this. And, you know, on my show, Justice, one of the things that I did was I talked about the fact that uranium is an essential ingredient for Moly 99, which the law in this country requires that, you know, we make in this country, that we are now shipping uranium out to other countries and then paying for it. It's an essential ingredient for nuclear medicine, for medical isotopes. It now makes sense to me that, you know, the Russians were in such a rush to buy it. But what do you think is going to happen if this witness who was gagged, and now Dianne Feinstein wants to hear from this FBI informant and is now ungagged? What do you think we're going to hear from him?
Well, I have to say up front, I have not met him. I don't know him. But what I understand by looking at legal documents involving his case, this guy was an insider's insider.
Right.
He was being paid by the Russian company $50,000 a month to serve as a lobbyist. And in the legal filings, what you find is his job was to basically carry the flag for this entity in Washington, D.C. And that job included setting up meetings with high-ranking administration officials. This would have been the Obama administration, people on Capitol Hill, and other elite influence makers. So he was working at a very, very high level. And what has leaked out seems to indicate he's got a lot of information that relates specifically to uranium-1. So it's going to be very exciting. And I think it's important to point out, Judge, also, remember, we already have a foreign government official saying that involving uranium-1, that he and his fellow government employees were extorted by the Clintons, then Senator Hillary Clinton. This comes from the Kazakh head of their atomic agency, saying that Senator Clinton refused to meet with Kazakh officials unless and until they granted uranium concessions to Frank Giustra, who ended up giving, more than $100 million to the Clinton Foundation. So we've got that testimony. We've got this new witness coming out. It's going to get very interesting here in the weeks ahead.
Peter, were you ever afraid for your life as you were investigating this, as you were writing the book?
Well, I'll just say this, Judge, in general terms, we do take and have taken security precautions. We do face in our organization cyber challenges on a regular basis. This is important stuff, and I think the more public it is, the better it is for everybody who's investigating it, whether that's the informant or whether that's other journalists who are pursuing this story.
Do you think that ultimately there will be justice in this case?
Look, I think there should be. And I think right now, I think we take this step by step. And I remember you and I sat down in New York and had lunch, and you walked me through the process of prosecution. It's a step by step. First thing we need to do is gather all the information without having one subpoena, without having looked at any of Hillary's emails, while not looking at any personal communications. We already have the transference of money, that money being hidden, not publicized by the Clintons, that they received this money at the time the deal was being approved. And we have a witness, this foreign senior government official, and we now have this other informant. That's a lot of evidence without one subpoena, without any investigatory powers being used. So let's gather all the information and find out what happened.
All right, Peter, thanks so much.